Where do you think you're going dressed like that? Lorenzo Francesco's voice sliced through the silence of the estate before Sienna Williams even touched the door. She froze. Her fingertips hovered an inch from the brass handle, close enough to feel the cold radiating off the metal. Her other hand clutched the slim strap of her purse, so tight her knuckles went white. For half a second, she thought she'd imagined it. Lorenzo didn't talk to her. Not really. He gave orders, grunted acknowledgments, and left rooms when she entered them. But his voice came again, lower this time, closer. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. Now that you're relaxed and ready to unwind, please subscribe and let me know where you're listening from. Tomorrow brings another soft, comforting tale. Now, let's continue quietly with Sienna's story. Sienna. She turned. He stood at the far end of the marble hallway, just outside the archway to the den. Behind him, the massive glass walls framed the dark expanse of the estate grounds, security lights casting his shadow long across the floor. He wore black trousers and a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The geometric tattoos that crawled up his neck and wrapped around his forearms looked sharper in the low light, like they'd been carved into his skin with a blade. His hair was still damp from a shower, pushed back carelessly with his fingers. His eyes were on her, and they were not calm. Sienna had seen that look before. She'd seen it aimed at men in expensive suits who walked into his office talking too loud and walked out silent. She'd seen it right before he made a single phone call that ended someone's career, someone's freedom, someone's life. She had never seen it aimed at her. Tonight it came with something new. Shock, maybe. And beneath that, something dark and possessive that made the air between them feel too thin. She swallowed hard. Good evening, Mr. Francesco. He didn't answer. He didn't give her his usual curt nod, or the dismissive wave that meant get back to work. He walked toward her. Her pulse spiked. She'd worked for him for a year. In all that time, Lorenzo Francesco had never closed the distance between them with this much intent. The hallway lights were warm, meant to feel welcoming, but right now they felt like stage lights exposing every inch of her. Sienna became painfully aware of the crimson silk clinging to her body. The dress had thin straps that barely held onto her shoulders. The neckline dipped lower than anything she owned. The fabric stopped high on her thighs, showing more leg than she'd shown in this house in 12 months. Backless, daring, expensive. She had felt powerful when she zipped it up in her tiny bedroom an hour ago. Under Lorenzo's stare, she felt naked. He stopped close enough that she could smell him. Clean soap, expensive cologne, and something darker underneath. Gun oil, maybe. Whiskey. His gaze started at her face, traveled down the bare curve of her shoulder, followed the line of her waist to where the silk ended, then dragged back up. Slow, deliberate. His jaw flexed. He exhaled through his nose like he was trying to keep something leashed. I'll ask again, he said, his voice rough, barely controlled. Where are you going? Sienna lifted her chin, forcing herself to hold his gaze. It's my night off. The words came out steadier than she felt. I finished everything. The kitchen's spotless. Your shirts are pressed. Tomorrow's schedule is on your desk. I clocked out 2 hours ago. You go out every week. His eyes never left hers. You don't go out like this. He wasn't wrong. Usually she wore jeans, a loose sweater, something forgettable. She spent 50 hours a week surrounded by marble and crystal, and men in $1,000 suits. Outside these walls, she preferred to blend in. Tonight was different. Tonight she had a reason to be seen. I have plans, she said, her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm meeting someone. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Who? She hesitated. The truth sat on her tongue, precious and fragile. My brother. His eyes went black, not relieved, not understanding, something far more dangerous. Sienna. He stepped closer. Close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to keep eye contact. Close enough that the heat coming off his body made the silk feel like nothing at all. You don't have a brother. Her breath caught. Yes, I do. Toby. We were separated in foster care when I was 14, and he's been trying to find me. And tonight. You don't have a brother, Lorenzo repeated, his voice dropping to something lethal. Because your brother is dead. The words hit her like a fist to the chest. She reached for the door handle behind her, needing something solid to hold on to, needing to get out, needing air. Slam. His palm hit the wood beside her head. The sound cracked through the hallway like a gunshot. She flinched. He didn't touch her, but his arm caged her in, his body a wall between her and escape. This close, she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, the barely controlled fury in his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell too fast. When he spoke again, his lips were close enough to her ear that she felt the words as much as heard them. "Take one step out that door, Sienna, and you won't survive the night." She should have been terrified. Any sane person would be. But there was something in his voice that wasn't threat. It was grief. It was desperation. And beneath the expensive cologne and the deadly calm, Lorenzo Francesco was shaking. An hour ago, Sienna had stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom, smoothing down the red silk with trembling hands. She'd stared at her reflection and whispered to the girl looking back, "I'm finally going to see him." Tears had blurred her vision, but she'd blinked them away. She couldn't show up to meet her brother with mascara running down her face. The text messages had started 3 weeks ago. Unknown number. Simple words that had changed everything. "Little bird, it's me, it's Toby." She dropped her phone the first time she read it. 10 years. 10 years of wondering if he was alive, if he remembered her, if he'd tried to find her. And now he had. The messages came daily after that. Nothing too detailed. Just enough to feel real. Memories only Toby would know. The way she used to hum while doing dishes. The scar on her knee from falling off his bike. The nickname their mother had given her before the state took them both away. He wanted to meet. Tonight. At a gala downtown. He said he'd gotten his life together. That he had something important to give her. She'd believed him. God, she'd wanted to believe him so badly. She'd gone to the boutique yesterday. The one Lorenzo owned. The only place he allowed her to shop because his security cleared it first. His men had been at the doors. She'd felt safe. The sales assistant had been kind, patient, helping her find the perfect dress. Red silk. Elegant. The kind of dress you wore when you wanted to feel like you mattered, like you were worth finding. Sienna had thanked the woman, paid with the credit card Lorenzo had given her for expenses, and left with the garment bag feeling lighter than she had in years. She'd spent the evening planning what to say, how to act, whether to hug him first or just stand there crying. She'd tiptoed through the hallway tonight, her heart pounding with excitement, thinking she'd successfully slipped past the monster of the house. Now that monster had her pinned against the door, telling her the one person she had left in the world was dead. "You're lying," she whispered. Her voice broke on the last word. "He texted me. He's waiting for me right now." Lorenzo's other hand came up, not touching her but braced against the door on her other side, fully caged now. His forehead dropped until it was inches from hers. "I'm not lying. And whoever's waiting for you downtown isn't your brother. It's the man who killed him." The hallway tilted. Sienna's knees went weak. Lorenzo caught her by the waist before she could collapse, his grip firm but not painful. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. He pulled her away from the door, his hand wrapped around her wrist like a shackle. She tried to dig her heels in, but the marble was too slick, and he was too strong. "Let me go. You don't understand. I have to. You're not going anywhere." His voice was final, absolute. He dragged her down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the sitting room, toward the east wing where his private study was, the one with the reinforced steel door, the one she'd only been inside twice to deliver paperwork. He pushed the door open and pulled her inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. Lorenzo released her wrist and moved to the wall panel. He pressed his palm against the biometric scanner. A mechanical whir filled the room. Heavy steel shutters descended over the windows with a series of metallic clangs. The deadbolts in the door engaged with sharp clicks. The lights brightened to an almost clinical intensity. Sienna stumbled backward, her shoulders hitting the bookshelf behind her. She watched Lorenzo move around the room with military precision, checking locks, activating systems she didn't understand. When he finally turned back to her, his expression was carved from stone. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair in front of his desk. She didn't move, couldn't move. "Sienna, sit down." Her legs obeyed before her brain caught up. She sank into the chair, her hands gripping the armrests, her heart trying to break through her ribcage. Lorenzo walked behind his desk but didn't sit. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder. Thick, worn, like he'd opened it 1,000 times. He dropped it on the desk between them. The sound was too loud in the sealed room. "Your brother's name was Tobias Williams," Lorenzo said, his voice flat, clinical. "He died 2 years ago. I know, because I was there when it happened." Sienna shot out of the chair like she'd been electrocuted. "No, The word came out strangled, desperate. "No, you're lying." "He texted me. He called me Little Bird." Only Toby knew that name. She backed away from the desk, shaking her head so hard her vision blurred. "He's waiting for me right now. I have to go." "I have to." Lorenzo moved around the desk with terrifying speed. She tried to sidestep him, tried to make it to the door, but he caught her wrist and spun her back. "Let me go." She slammed her free hand against his chest, pushed with everything she had. It was like pushing a brick wall. "I bought this dress at your boutique. Your men were there. I was safe." Her voice climbed higher with each word, panic clawing up her throat. "You cleared the building for me. You always clear it. No one could have touched me. Sienna, listen to me." His grip on her wrist tightened. Not painful, but unbreakable. She twisted, tried to wrench herself free, and he caught her other wrist too. She fought him, really fought him, used her nails, her elbows, threw her weight backward. Lorenzo absorbed every hit without flinching, his jaw set, his eyes hard. When she tried to knee him, he turned his hip and trapped her leg between his. "Stop," he growled. She didn't stop. She couldn't. If she stopped moving, she'd have to think about what he'd said. That Toby was dead, that someone was pretending to be him, that the messages, the hope, the reunion she'd been counting down to for 3 weeks was all a lie. She'd rather bleed than believe that. Lorenzo seemed to realize words weren't going to work. In one smooth motion, he released her wrists, bent low, and scooped her up. One arm hooked under her knees, the other around her back. Sienna gasped, her world tilting sideways. "Put me down." She beat her fists against his shoulder, kicked her legs, but he held her like she weighed nothing, like she was something fragile he needed to contain before she shattered. He'd already carried her to the study earlier, but now he moved her to the center of the room, away from the door, away from the windows, away from any possible escape. He set her down only when they were standing in front of his massive oak desk. The moment her heels touched the floor, she tried to bolt. Lorenzo's hand shot out and caught the back of her dress. The silk pulled taut across her chest. "I was safe!" she screamed at him, whirling around to face him. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and furious. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to lock me in here and tell me my brother is dead and expect me to just believe you." Her chest heaved. "I went to your boutique, the one you own. Your security was at every door. I saw them. The woman who helped me was sweet. She was kind. She spent an hour making sure the dress fit perfectly." Lorenzo's expression didn't change. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He just reached for her. Sienna flinched backward, but his hand caught the fabric at her hip. His fingers curled into the silk. "What are you? RRRRRP." The sound of tearing fabric cut through her words like a blade. Lorenzo yanked hard, splitting the inner lining of the dress from hem to waist. The silk separated, the hidden layer underneath shredding in his grip. Sienna stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the desk. "Are you insane?" She looked down at the ruined dress, at the exposed lining hanging in strips, and then she saw it. A tiny red light, blinking, embedded in the torn fabric. No bigger than a button, nestled in the seam where she never would have felt it, never would have seen it. A microchip. A tracker. Her breath stopped. Lorenzo held up the scrap of fabric with the device still attached, the red light pulsing like a heartbeat in his palm. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Sienna's knees buckled. She grabbed the desk to keep from falling, her fingers digging into the polished wood. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not I don't understand." Lorenzo moved to the desk and slammed the fabric down beside the file folder. Then he opened the folder with sharp, controlled movements. He pulled out a stack of photographs and threw them across the desk. They scattered like playing cards. Crime scene photos. Sienna's stomach lurched. The images showed a narrow alley, brick walls, dumpsters, and a body, a woman's body, crumpled against the pavement, her face pale and slack in death. She wore a boutique uniform, the same uniform Sienna had seen yesterday, the same face. Her name was Gabriela Torres, Lorenzo said, his voice cold and clinical, like he was reading from a report. "She worked for me for 10 years. Loyal, trustworthy. She had a daughter in college." He tapped one of the photos. "They found her behind the boutique 6 hours after you left. Single gunshot to the back of the head, execution style." Sienna couldn't breathe. The room spun. She stared at the woman's face in the photograph, recognizing the kind eyes, the warm smile. Except this wasn't the woman who'd helped her try on dresses. The woman in the photo was heavier, older, her hair was shorter. I don't... Sienna's voice broke, but she helped me. She was there. She handed me the dress. That wasn't Gabriella, Lorenzo said. He pulled out another photo. This one showed a different woman, younger, blonde, cold eyes. This is the woman who was in that boutique yesterday. Professional impersonator. Works for the Volkov Syndicate. She killed Gabriella in the back office, took her uniform, and spent the afternoon playing dress-up with you. He leaned forward, his hands braced on the desk, his face inches from hers. She planted that tracker in the dress, Sienna, while you were in the fitting room. While you thought you were safe. The nausea hit her in waves. Sienna pressed a hand to her mouth, her whole body shaking. I own the walls, Sienna, Lorenzo said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice now, something that sounded like regret. I control the cameras, the locks, the security at the door, but I don't own the shadows. I can't protect you from someone willing to kill an innocent woman just to get close to you. He straightened, running a hand through his hair. For the first time since this nightmare started, he looked tired. You weren't shopping for a dress yesterday. You were being hunted, and you led them straight back here. Sienna sank into the chair, her legs refusing to hold her anymore. The red silk pooled around her, torn and ruined, the tracker still blinking its damning red light on the desk. A woman was dead. Gabriela Torres. A woman with a daughter, a life, a future. Dead because Sienna wanted to look pretty for a reunion that was never going to happen. Dead because someone needed to track her movements. Dead because she existed. The tears came harder now, choking sobs that shook her entire frame. She covered her face with her hands, unable to look at the photos anymore, unable to process the magnitude of what Lorenzo was telling her. He was right. He'd been right all along. The monster wasn't the man standing in front of her. The monster was the one she'd been running toward. Lorenzo let her cry. He didn't try to comfort her, didn't offer empty words or false reassurances. He just stood there on the other side of the desk, watching her fall apart with something that looked like pain etched into the hard lines of his face. When the sobs finally subsided into shaky breaths, Sienna lifted her head. Her mascara was ruined, black streaks cutting down her cheeks. Her eyes were swollen and red. She didn't care. Toby wouldn't do this, she said, her voice hoarse and broken. He wouldn't. You're wrong. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Sienna, he's been texting me for weeks. She fumbled for her purse, which had fallen to the floor during the struggle. Her hands shook as she dug through it, pulling out her phone. He knows things only Toby would know. Memories, details. He called me Little Bird. She clutched the phone to her chest like a lifeline. That was our thing. Our mother used to call me that before she died. No one else knows that name. Sienna, put the phone down. Lorenzo's voice was low, warning. She ignored him. She unlocked the screen with trembling fingers and pulled up the message thread. Dozens of texts, all of them kind, nostalgic, filled with references to a childhood only she and Toby had shared. I'll prove it, she said, her thumb hovering over the call button. I'll call him right now and you'll see. You'll hear his voice and you'll know you're wrong. Her voice cracked. Please let me be right. Lorenzo closed his eyes briefly, like he was steeling himself for something he didn't want to do. When he opened them again, they were empty, resigned. Make the call. Sienna's heart lurched. She hadn't expected him to agree. Part of her had wanted him to stop her, to rip the phone from her hands, to give her an excuse not to know the truth. But he just stood there, waiting. She pressed the call button, put it on speaker. The ringtone filled the sealed study, each trill loud and sharp in the heavy silence. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone picked up. Little Bird? The voice was warm, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. Are you coming? Sienna's breath hitched. Relief flooded through her so fast and fierce it made her dizzy. See? She looked up at Lorenzo, tears streaming down her face again. But these were different. These were tears of vindication. Only Toby calls me that. Only him. Lorenzo didn't move. His expression didn't change. He just reached for his computer and turned the monitor toward her. Tell him you're running late, he said quietly. Keep him talking. Sienna frowned but brought the phone closer to her mouth. I'm still getting ready. I'll be there soon. Take your time, Little Bird, the voice said, and there was something in the tone that made her skin prickle. something that didn't quite fit the memories she'd built in her head. "I've waited 10 years. I can wait a few more minutes." The call ended. Sienna stared at the phone, that prickling sensation spreading from her skin into her bones. Lorenzo pressed a key on his computer. "Listen." A file opened. Audio only. The quality was terrible, full of static and distant echoes. It sounded like it had been recorded in a concrete room. At first, Sienna couldn't make out the words, just muffled sounds, shuffling. Then a voice, clearer than the rest. "Tell me the nickname." "No." The second voice was younger, weaker, stretched thin with pain. Sienna's blood turned to ice. "Tell me the nickname or I put another bullet in your knee. Please." The sound of impact. Flesh on flesh. A grunt of agony. "The nickname. The one your mother gave her." Silence. Long and terrible. Then, so quiet, Sienna almost missed it. "Little bird." Another impact. Heavier this time. The wet crack of bone breaking. "Say it again. Louder." "Little bird." The young voice was sobbing now, desperate and raw. She used to hum while she worked. "She has a scar on her knee from falling off my bike. Our mother died when she was 7. Little bird, that's what we called her. Little bird." Lorenzo stopped the recording. The study fell silent except for the ringing in Sienna's ears. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the sound of that voice. Toby's voice, screaming, begging, giving up the most precious thing they had just to make the pain stop. "That recording is 2 years old," Lorenzo said. His voice sounded far away, like he was speaking to her from the other end of a tunnel. "We pulled it from a Volkov safe house after a raid. By the time we got there, your brother was already dead." Sienna's phone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the desk. The man on the phone wasn't Toby. The man on the phone was the monster who'd tortured that nickname out of him, who'd stolen her most sacred memory and weaponized it, who'd been using her dead brother's voice, his words, his love, to lure her into a trap. The room tilted. Sienna gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white, her whole body shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "I need to leave." The words came out mechanical, disconnected from her brain. "I'll go back to the agency. I'll get a new job, a new city. They won't find me." Lorenzo let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so dark and bitter. "There is no agency, Sienna." She blinked at him. "What?" "The placement agency. The one that supposedly hired you." He moved around the desk, his movements deliberate and predatory. "It doesn't exist." Her mind scrambled to make sense of his words. "That's not, I filled out an application. I did 3 interviews. They ran a background check." "I ran a background check," Lorenzo interrupted. He leaned back against the desk, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I created the application. I conducted the interviews through intermediaries. I built that entire employment pipeline just for you." He opened his laptop with one hand and typed something. The screen flickered. A website loaded. Dark background, white text, encrypted. Sienna's stomach dropped before she even saw the content. It was a listing, an auction. The header read, "Premium Acquisitions in Clinical." Corporate font. Lorenzo turned the screen fully toward her, and there she was, her photo, taken from her social media, probably, back when she'd still been naive enough to post pictures online. Younger, smiling. Underneath were details that made her skin crawl. Name, age, physical description, background, foster care history, no family, no connections. And at the bottom, in red text, sold. "Your foster father listed you a year ago," Lorenzo said, his voice carefully controlled, like he was trying not to let emotion leak through. "He had debts, gambling debts with the wrong people. They gave him a choice, pay up or offer collateral." He gestured to the screen. "You were the collateral." Sienna couldn't look away from her own face staring back at her. That girl in the photo had no idea. No idea she'd been bartered like livestock. No idea men had bid on her like she was property. "I didn't hire a maid, Sienna." Lorenzo's voice dropped lower, rougher. "I outbid a trafficking ring to buy your debt. Legally. Quietly. And then I buried the sale so deep, no one would ever find it." Her eyes snapped to his. "You bought me. I saved you," he corrected. "There's a difference." "You bought me." Her voice climbed, hysteria creeping in at the edges. You've been paying me with my own money? This whole year, I thought I was working. I thought I was earning." "You were," he said firmly. Every dollar you made, you earned. The trust fund is yours. The account is in your name. I just created the framework so you could keep your dignity." He straightened, and suddenly he was towering over her again, his presence overwhelming. "I gave you a job title, a salary, references, everything you needed to feel like a person instead of a transaction." Sienna's vision blurred. She'd spent a year feeling grateful. Grateful for the opportunity. Grateful for the security. Grateful to Lorenzo Francesco for giving her a chance when no one else would. And the whole time, she'd belonged to him. "The agency interviews were real," he continued, and something in his tone made her look up. "I needed to know who you were, what you wanted, if you were worth the risk." His eyes locked on hers, and there was something burning in them that she couldn't name. "You were." Sienna pushed away from the desk so violently the chair scraped across the floor. "You're just another criminal." Her voice was raw, scraped clean of everything except rage. "You buy people. You own things. You sit in your fortress and play God with everyone's lives." She was shaking, her whole body vibrating with a fury she couldn't contain. "You don't know what family means. You don't know what it's like to lose the only person who mattered." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Lorenzo went completely still. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike. His eyes went flat and cold, emptied of everything except something dark and dangerous that made the air between them feel like broken glass. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Say that again." Sienna's breath caught, but she didn't back down. Couldn't back down. The grief was too big, the betrayal too deep. "You don't understand. Toby was all I had. He was the only person in this world who knew me, who loved me. And now he's gone and you're standing here telling me you owned me like I'm some kind of—" Lorenzo moved, not toward her, away. He turned his back and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the steel shutters like he could see through them to something far away, something that hurt. Then his hands went to the buttons of his shirt. Sienna froze, her anger stuttering in her chest. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just unbuttoned the shirt with slow, deliberate movements. One button, then another. The white fabric parted, revealing the hard planes of his chest, the geometric tattoos that crawled up from his collarbone and wrapped around his shoulders. And there, directly over his heart, was a scar, jagged, ugly, the kind of scar that came from something that should have killed him. The ink had been worked around it, like the artist had tried to incorporate the damage into the design, but couldn't quite hide the violence underneath. It was raised and puckered, the tissue shiny where it had healed wrong. A bullet wound, close range. Lorenzo turned back to face her, the shirt hanging open, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He pressed his palm flat against the scar, right over his heart. "I know exactly what it's like," he said, his voice rough and low. "Because the bullet that made this scar was meant for me." Sienna couldn't move, couldn't speak. She just stared at that ruined skin, at the evidence of violence carved into his body. "Toby wasn't some innocent kid caught in the crossfire," Lorenzo continued. His hand dropped from his chest, hanging loose at his side. "He was working for me, voluntarily. He came to me 2 years ago, desperate, asking for help getting you out of the foster system." His jaw tightened. "He knew what your foster father was planning. He'd overheard phone calls, seen messages. He knew you were being sold and he didn't have the money to stop it." The room tilted. Sienna's hand shot out, gripping the edge of the bookshelf to keep herself upright. "So he made a deal with me," Lorenzo said. "He'd work as an informant, feed me intel on the Volkov operation from the inside. In exchange, I'd make sure you disappeared off their radar. New identity, clean slate, freedom." His eyes locked on hers, and there was something raw in them now, something bleeding. He was good at it, better than I expected. For 6 months, he fed me locations, shipment schedules, names. We were building a case to take the whole operation down. Lorenzo's hand drifted back to the scar, his fingers tracing the edges like he could still feel the impact. "We were meeting at a warehouse, supposed to be secure, but someone tipped them off. They came in armed, ready to execute both of us." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I saw the gun, saw the shooter aim. I was reaching for my weapon when Toby moved." Sienna's legs gave out. She slid down the bookshelf until she was sitting on the floor, her ruined red dress pooling around her. "He didn't hesitate," Lorenzo said. "Didn't think. He just stepped in front of me and took the bullet." His hand pressed harder against the scar, like he was trying to push the memory back inside. It went through him first, slowed down enough that when it hit me, it didn't kill me. Just left this. He dropped his hand. I am breathing your air, Sienna, because your brother stopped breathing. The grief that hit her was different this time. Not the sharp, fresh agony of losing Toby all over again, but something deeper, older, the weight of 2 years of lies and protection and sacrifice she'd never known about. Toby hadn't abandoned her, hadn't forgotten her. He'd died trying to save her, and the man she'd been blaming, the man she'd called a criminal and a monster, was the man her brother had loved enough to die for. He asked me to find you, Lorenzo said quietly, with his last breath. Made me promise I'd keep you safe, that I'd make sure you never ended up on another auction block. He buttoned his shirt slowly, covering the scar, his movements mechanical. But you vanished into the system. It took me a year to track you down. By the time I finally found you, it was almost too late. Your foster father had already listed you. So I did the only thing I could. I bought your debt. I created a job. I put you in this house where I could watch you every second of every day and make sure no one ever touched you again. Sienna looked up at him through blurred vision, seeing him clearly for the first time. The exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that never quite released, the way he'd been carrying her brother's dying wish like a chain around his neck for 2 years. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice broke on the words. Lorenzo met her gaze, and for just a moment, she saw past the armor, saw the guilt, the grief, the unbearable weight of surviving when someone else hadn't. Because you deserved 1 year of peace, he said. 1 year where you didn't have to know your brother died screaming your name. 1 year where you could just exist without the weight of what he sacrificed. He turned away, facing the shuttered window again. I would have given you more if I could, but they found you anyway. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then the alarms screamed to life. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched wail that pierced through the steel-reinforced walls and made Sienna's teeth ache. Red emergency lights flooded the study, strobing across Lorenzo's face as he spun toward the security monitors mounted on the wall. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. The grief, the vulnerability, the raw emotion that had been carved into his features seconds ago vanished, replaced by something cold and lethal. They're here. His voice was flat, emotionless. He moved to a panel hidden behind a false bookshelf and pressed his palm against it. The wall clicked open, revealing an arsenal. Handguns, rifles, ammunition. He grabbed a Glock, checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, and shoved it into the holster at his hip. Then he grabbed a second weapon and turned to her. Stay here. It wasn't a request. Do not open this door. Do not leave this room. Do you understand me? Sienna couldn't speak. She just stared at him, her mind still trying to process the alarms, the weapons, the fact that the tracker in her dress had led an army straight to his gates. Lorenzo crossed the room in 2 strides and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Sienna, do you understand? She nodded, the movement jerky and disconnected. Good. He released her and moved toward the door, his hand on the biometric lock. If anyone comes through this door who isn't me, you hide in the panic room behind that bookshelf. There's a phone inside. You call the number programmed into it, and you do not come out until I come get you. The door slid open. The sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere deep in the estate. Close. Too close. Lorenzo paused in the doorway, his profile sharp in the red emergency lighting. I made a promise to your brother, he said without looking back. I don't break my promises. Then he was gone, the door sliding shut behind him with a heavy metallic thunk. The locks engaged. Sienna was alone. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, her heart hammering against her ribs, the sound of distant gunfire making her flinch with each crack. Lorenzo had told her to stay, had told her to hide, but the thought of crouching in a panic room while people died because of her, because of the dress she'd stupidly brought into this house, made her stomach revolt. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against the cold steel. More gunfire, shouting, the sound of something heavy crashing, and then, cutting through it all, a scream. High-pitched, terrified. Female. Maria. Sienna's hand went to the biometric lock before she could think it through. She pressed her palm against it, praying Lorenzo had added her to the security clearance. The lock beeped. Red light. Access denied. She tried again, panic climbing up her throat. Beep. Red light. Come on. Come on, she whispered, pressing harder like that would make a difference. On the 3rd try, the light turned green. The locks disengaged with a series of clicks. The door slid open. Sienna ran. The hallway was chaos. The emergency lights painted everything in shades of crimson. The alarms were louder out here, disorienting. She could hear footsteps, shouting, the percussion of gunfire echoing through the massive house. She ran toward the kitchen, toward the sound of that scream, her bare feet silent on the marble, the torn red dress dragged behind her, the ruined fabric catching on corners. She rounded the archway into the kitchen and stopped dead. Maria stood near the service entrance, her back to Sienna, her hand on the door handle. The sweet, grandmotherly woman who'd made Sienna tea when she couldn't sleep, who'd taught her how to fold Lorenzo's shirts the way he liked, who'd hugged her on her birthday and called her Mija. "Maria!" Sienna's voice came out, choked with relief. "Maria, thank God. We need to hide. They're inside the house." Maria turned. Her face was calm, too calm. There was no fear in her eyes, no panic, no concern, just a cold, calculating assessment that made Sienna's blood freeze. "Maria?" The older woman's hand twisted the service door handle. The lock disengaged. "I'm sorry, child," Maria said, and her voice was empty of warmth, empty of the affection Sienna had come to rely on. They paid too well. The door swung open. 3 men burst through, armed and tactical, their faces covered with black masks. Sienna screamed. She tried to run, but her feet wouldn't move, her body locked in place by pure terror. The first man raised his weapon, the barrel swinging toward her chest. This was it. This was how she died. In a torn red dress, betrayed by the only mother figure she'd had in 10 years, shot in the kitchen where she'd spent a year making coffee and pretending she had a home. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. But Sienna didn't feel the impact, didn't feel pain. She watched the first man's head snap back, a spray of red misting the air. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The second man turned, trying to track the shooter, but another shot rang out and he went down too. The third man got his weapon halfway up before a shadow detached itself from the pantry doorway and a hand grabbed his wrist, twisting with brutal efficiency. The sound of bone snapping was sickeningly loud. The man screamed. Lorenzo's other hand came up, his Glock pressed under the man's jaw, and he pulled the trigger without hesitation. The body hit the floor. Silence. Lorenzo stood in the middle of the carnage, his white shirt splattered with blood that wasn't his chest heaving, his eyes wild and feral. He looked at Maria. The older woman hadn't moved. She stood frozen by the open service door, her face pale, her hands trembling now. "How long?" Lorenzo's voice was barely recognizable. Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. Lorenzo crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and grabbed her by the throat, slamming her back against the wall. Not hard enough to kill, but hard enough to make breathing difficult. "How long have you been selling her out?" 6 months, Maria choked out. "They paid me to watch her, to report her movements. When she started wearing red," she gasped for air. "The tracker brought them to the gate. My job was just to unlock the door so they could get in without tripping the silent alarms." Lorenzo's grip tightened. Sienna watched his knuckles go white, watched the muscle in his jaw tick with the effort of restraint. For a long moment, she thought he was going to kill Maria right there. Part of her wanted him to, but he just held her there, suspended, forcing her to look at Sienna. "Look at her," he growled. "Look at what you sold." Maria's eyes found Sienna's. There was no remorse there, no guilt, just the cold calculation of someone who'd made a choice and accepted the consequences. Lorenzo released her and she crumpled to the floor, gasping. He turned his back on her like she was already dead, already erased from existence. His eyes found Sienna across the kitchen, standing in the doorway in her ruined dress, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "I told you to stay in the study," he said. There was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion, just the weight of knowing she'd almost died because she didn't listen. Sienna looked at the bodies on the floor, looked at Maria huddled against the wall, looked at Lorenzo standing in the center of it all, the only thing between her and death. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Lorenzo holstered his weapon and crossed to her. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that his presence felt like a shield. "The monster isn't me, Sienna," he said quietly. "It never was." Lorenzo's hand closed around Sienna's wrist, and he pulled her away from the kitchen, away from the bodies, away from Maria's hollow stare. She didn't resist, couldn't resist. Her legs moved on autopilot, following his lead as he dragged her back through the blood-red hallways toward the study. The alarms had finally stopped. leaving behind a ringing silence that felt worse than the noise. Somewhere in the house, she could hear his security team moving, clearing rooms, securing the perimeter. But all she could see was Maria's face. Cold, empty, transactional. They reached the study, and Lorenzo shoved her inside, the door sliding shut and locking behind them with that same heavy thunk. The moment the locks engaged, he rounded on her. "What part of stay here did you not understand?" His voice was tight, controlled fury barely leashed. "I told you not to leave. I told you to hide. You could have been killed, Sienna. Do you understand that? 5 more seconds and you would have been dead on that kitchen floor." She just stared at him, her mind struggling to process words. He took a step closer, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to shake her, to make her understand the magnitude of what had almost happened. Then he stopped, really looked at her, saw the trembling that had taken over her entire body, the shock glazing her eyes, the way she was hugging herself like she could physically hold the pieces together. His expression shifted, the anger drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like pain. "Christ," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You're in shock." He moved to her then, his hands surprisingly gentle as they framed her face, tilting her head up so he could look into her eyes. "Are you hurt?" His voice was different now, softer, careful. "Did they touch you? Did Maria?" Sienna shook her head, the movement small and jerky. Lorenzo's thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, checking for injuries she didn't have. His hands moved down to her shoulders, her arms, his touch methodical and clinical even as his jaw stayed tight with tension. He was checking for wounds, for blood, for any sign that she'd been damaged in the chaos. "I'm okay," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure that was true. Lorenzo didn't look convinced. He guided her to the leather couch against the wall, easing her down like she might shatter. Then he disappeared into the back of the study, toward the massive wall safe she'd only seen him open once. She heard the electronic beeps of the combination, the heavy click of the lock disengaging. When he came back, he was holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a piece of paper, folded and stained, dark brown with old blood. He sat down beside her on the couch, close enough that their knees touched. He held the bag like it was fragile, like it might disintegrate if he gripped too hard. "I wasn't going to show you this," he said quietly. "I thought it would hurt more than help. But you need to understand." He placed the bag in her hands. Sienna looked down at the letter through the clear plastic. The paper was torn at one edge, crumpled like it had been clutched in a desperate fist. The blood had soaked through in places, making some of the words illegible, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Messy, slanted slightly to the right, the way Toby always wrote. Her hand started shaking so hard she almost dropped it. Lorenzo's hand came up, steadying hers, helping her hold it so she could read. "Renzo," the letter began, and even seeing her brother's nickname for Lorenzo made her chest constrict. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. I need you to promise me something. Find Sienna. Find my sister and don't let her be alone. She's been alone her whole life, and she doesn't deserve that. You're the only good man I know, the only one I trust with this. Keep her safe. Give her a life. Love her for me, please. She's all that matters. Little bird deserves to fly. Make sure she does. Toby." The grief hit her like a physical blow. Sienna doubled over, a sob tearing from her throat so raw it hurt. Lorenzo caught her before she could collapse completely, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest. She hit him, slammed her fists against his shoulders, his chest, anywhere she could reach. "Why didn't you tell me?" Each word was punctuated by another blow. "Why did you keep this from me? Why did you let me think I was alone?" Lorenzo took every hit without flinching, his arms never loosening, his body absorbing her grief and rage like he'd been built to carry it. When she finally ran out of strength, when her fists uncurled and her hands just pressed flat against his chest, he caught her wrists, gently, carefully. He pulled her closer, until there was no space between them, until she could feel his heartbeat thundering against her palms. His forehead came down to rest against hers, and she could feel his breath ghosting across her lips. "I took the burden so you could have a year of peace," he said, his voice rough and raw. "I would take 1,000 bullets before I let you walk into a trap. I would burn this entire city down before I let anyone hurt you." His hand slid from her wrists, up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your brother asked me to love you, and I have, Sienna, every single day, from the shadows where you couldn't see it." The air between them went electric, charged, dangerous. Sienna's breath caught as his words sank in, as the weight of what he was saying settled into her bones. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw it written in every line of his face. The exhaustion, the devotion, the year he'd spent watching her, protecting her, loving her from a distance because he thought that's what she needed. She closed the distance. It wasn't graceful or gentle. She grabbed the front of his blood-stained shirt and pulled him down, her mouth crashing against his with a desperation that bordered on violence. Lorenzo made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a growl, and his hands tightened on her face. He kissed her back like he was drowning, and she was air, like he'd been holding this back for so long that now that the dam had broken, he couldn't stop. His mouth was hot and demanding, his teeth catching her bottom lip, his tongue sliding against hers in a way that made heat pool low in her belly despite everything, despite the bodies in the kitchen and the blood on his clothes and the grief still clawing at her chest. She tasted salt from her tears, copper from where she'd bitten her lip, and underneath it all, him, Lorenzo, the man who'd bought her freedom, who'd carried her brother's last wish like a sacred oath, who'd just killed 3 men to keep her breathing. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel alive after coming so close to death. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her, repositioning her until she was straddling his lap, the ruined red dress pooling around them like spilled wine. The kiss broke when they both needed air, their foreheads still pressed together, their breathing ragged and uneven. Lorenzo's hands trembled against her face, and Sienna realized with a shock that this man, this lethal, controlled man who'd just killed 3 people without hesitation, was shaking because of her, because of what they'd just done, because of what it meant. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers, looking for regret or fear or rejection. She didn't give him any of those things. She just held onto his shirt and tried to remember how to breathe. The gunfire outside had stopped. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the distant shout of his security team coordinating sweeps. Lorenzo's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "We should," he started. But whatever he was going to say was cut off by the radio clipped to his belt crackling to life. "Perimeter secure, boss. Hostiles neutralized. 2 wounded on our side. Nothing critical." Lorenzo grabbed the radio without moving Sienna from his lap. "Copy. Full lockdown protocols until sunrise. No one in or out. Run thermal scans on the grounds." He released the button and let the radio drop back to his belt, his other hand still resting on Sienna's hip, like he was afraid if he let go completely, she'd disappear. Sienna slid off his lap, the loss of contact making her feel suddenly cold, despite the warmth of the room. She wrapped her arms around herself, the torn red dress hanging off her frame in ruined strips. She needed to move, needed to process, needed to understand the magnitude of everything that had just happened. The bodies, Maria's betrayal, Toby's letter, the kiss that had felt like drowning and salvation all at once. She walked toward the windows, toward the steel shutters that had protected them during the assault. Someone had raised them slightly during the firefight, probably to give Lorenzo's team sightlines. Through the gap, she could see the main gates in the distance, illuminated by security lights. The gates where she was supposed to have met her brother, where she would have walked straight into an execution. Her hand touched the reinforced glass, cold and smooth under her fingertips. "I almost walked out there," she whispered. "I was so sure, so certain that he was waiting for me." Lorenzo stood, buttoning his shirt to cover the scar, hiding the vulnerability he'd shown her. "You didn't know. They were good. They always are." He moved toward her but stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "Sienna." That's when she saw it. A tiny red dot appeared on the silk fabric of her dress, right over her heart. It wavered for a second, tracking, adjusting. She frowned, looking down at the dot of light dancing across the red fabric. "Lorenzo, what?" He moved faster than she thought possible. 1 second he was across the room, the next his body was slamming into hers, tackling her to the floor. They hit hard, his arms wrapped around her, cushioning her fall even as his weight drove the air from her lungs. Crack. The sound was deafening. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed, a starburst pattern radiating from a single point of impact. Right where Sienna had been standing, right where her heart had been. "Stay down." Lorenzo's body covered hers completely, his chest pressed to her back, his arms caging her in. Crack! The second shot hit the same spot. This time the glass gave way, exploding inward in a shower of crystalline fragments. The pieces rained down around them, glittering like deadly snow in the emergency lighting. Lorenzo's hand came up to shield her head, his body taking the brunt of the falling glass. Sienna felt the sharp sting of cuts on her exposed arms, felt Lorenzo flinch as larger pieces struck his shoulders and back, but he didn't move, didn't give the sniper another angle. The silence that followed was worse than the gunshots. Lorenzo stayed frozen over her, his breathing harsh in her ear, his heartbeat thundering against her spine. "Are you hit?" His voice was rough, urgent. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Good. Don't move. He's adjusting for wind. The third shot is coming." But the third shot never came. Instead, she heard return fire from somewhere on the roof. Lorenzo's counter-snipers engaging the threat. A long minute passed. Then, two. Finally, the radio crackled. Threat neutralized. Sniper down. Rooftop adjacent property, 800 meters. Lorenzo's arms tightened around her for a moment before he carefully shifted his weight, checking her for injuries with quick, efficient movements. His hands came away bloody, but it was his blood, not hers. Glass had shredded the back of his shirt. "They didn't want you back, Sienna," he said, his voice hollow. He helped her sit up, keeping her low, away from the shattered window. It wasn't a kidnapping. It was an execution. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the terrible truth. "You're the last witness, the only person who can connect them to Toby's death. They don't want to traffic you. They want you dead." Sienna looked at the shattered window, at the bullet holes in the wall behind where she'd been standing, at the red laser sight that had marked her for death. If she'd left this house tonight, she would have died. If she left tomorrow, next week, next year, they would find her. The only reason she was breathing right now was because Lorenzo had seen the danger before she did, because he'd thrown himself between her and a bullet. Again. "I can't leave," she whispered. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "No, you can't." Lorenzo's security team swept through the estate with military precision, their voices crackling over the radio with updates. All hostiles neutralized, perimeter secure, no additional threats detected. The words washed over Sienna like white noise, meaningless compared to the reality of Lorenzo kneeling beside her on the floor, surrounded by broken glass, his shirt soaked with blood from a dozen small cuts across his shoulders and back. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She reached for him, her fingers hovering over the torn fabric. "Let me see." "It's nothing." He tried to stand, tried to brush it off the way he brushed off everything that hurt him, but Sienna caught his wrist. "You just threw yourself on top of broken glass to keep me alive. Let me see the damage." There was steel in her voice now, the same steel he'd been using on her all night. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he nodded. Surrendered. Let her take control. She helped him to his feet, carefully avoiding the worst of the glass scattered across the floor. They moved to the couch, the same couch where they'd kissed minutes ago, where everything had changed. Lorenzo sat down heavily, exhaustion finally showing in the set of his shoulders. Sienna stood behind him, her hands gentle as she peeled the ruined shirt away from his skin. The fabric stuck to some of the deeper cuts, and he hissed when she pulled it free. "Sorry," she whispered. "I know." The damage was worse than she'd expected. Dozens of small lacerations crisscrossed his shoulders and upper back, some still bleeding sluggishly. A few larger pieces had embedded themselves deeper, and she could see the muscle beneath when she pressed the fabric aside. "You need a doctor?" she said. "I need bandages and antiseptic," he corrected. "Top drawer of the safe. Medical kit." Sienna moved to the massive wall safe, still hanging open from when he'd retrieved Toby's letter. She found the medical kit exactly where he said it would be, a professional trauma kit that looked like it had seen heavy use. As she reached for it, her eye caught on something else. A small velvet box, navy blue and worn at the edges, sitting next to a silver chain she recognized as Toby's. Her breath stopped. Her hand moved of its own accord, fingers closing around the box. It was heavier than she expected, substantial. She lifted it out and turned, holding it up. "What is this?" Lorenzo went very still. The exhaustion in his face transformed into something else, something that looked like resignation mixed with pain. "Open it." Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded silk, was a ring. Vintage, rose gold with intricate scrollwork and a small diamond that caught the light. She knew this ring, had seen it once, years ago, in a photograph her mother had kept hidden in her Bible. The only piece of jewelry her mother had owned, the only thing of value, gone when the state took custody, sold to pay debts Sienna hadn't even known existed. "How?" Her voice broke. "How do you have this?" Lorenzo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his bloodied back forgotten. I've had people tracking your family's lost belongings for the past year. The ring showed up at an estate sale 6 months ago. I bought it. He met her eyes, along with your mother's locket, your brother's baseball glove, and every photograph I could find. Sienna sank onto the couch beside him, the ring clutched in her fist. Why? Because I wasn't keeping you as a servant forever, Sienna. His voice was rough, raw. I was preparing your exit. I found the ring. I set up bank accounts in your name with enough money to disappear and start over anywhere in the world. I created a new identity, complete with employment history and references. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was going to give it all to you next week, tell you the truth about everything and let you walk away. The weight of what he was saying pressed down on her chest. You were going to let me go. I was going to set you free, he corrected. Give you the life your brother wanted for you, the normal life, the safe life. His hands clenched into fists on his knees. I love you enough to break my own heart, Sienna. I would have watched you leave and spent the rest of my life making sure you stayed safe from a distance. Sienna looked at the ring in her palm, then at Lorenzo sitting beside her, his back torn open from protecting her, his whole body radiating exhaustion and grief and love so deep it had been willing to destroy itself for her happiness. He'd been preparing to lose her, to give her freedom even though it would have killed him, to honor Toby's wish that she fly, even if it meant he'd never see her again. She closed her fingers around the ring and set it carefully on the table. Then she picked up the antiseptic and gauze from the medical kit. Turn around, she said softly. Lorenzo frowned. Sienna, turn around. He obeyed, presenting his damaged back to her. Sienna knelt on the couch behind him and began cleaning the wounds with careful, deliberate strokes. Each pass of the gauze was a choice. Each time she pressed antiseptic to a cut and felt him flinch was a promise. When she finally bandaged the worst of the damage, her hands came to rest on his shoulders, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. She leaned forward, her forehead pressing against the back of his neck, her breath warm against his skin. I don't want a normal life, she whispered. I don't want safe. I don't want to be free of you, Lorenzo. Her arms wrapped around his chest from behind, holding him the way he'd held her. I want this. I want you, even with the blood and the danger and the broken glass, especially with those things. She felt him shudder, felt something in him break and reform. I'm exactly where I belong. Morning light broke over the estate like a wound opening. Sienna stood at the window of Lorenzo's bedroom, where he'd carried her after she'd fallen asleep in his arms on the couch. She'd woken to find him already dressed, watching the sunrise with that distant look he got when he was calculating threats and planning 3 steps ahead. Below, she could see men in suits moving through the grounds. Police, Lorenzo had told her. His police, removing bodies, erasing evidence, making the night's violence disappear like it had never happened. She wore one of his shirts, the fabric hanging to her thighs, covering the ruined red dress she'd finally peeled off in the early hours. Her mother's ring sat on the nightstand where she'd placed it before sleep claimed her. Lorenzo turned from the window, his eyes finding her immediately. The bandages across his shoulders were visible through his fresh white shirt, a reminder of the glass he'd taken for her. It's done, he said quietly. The Volkov cell that was hunting you is gone. The syndicate will send someone new eventually, but not for a while, not after last night. He crossed to her, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. You're safe now, Sienna. As safe as you can be in this world. She wanted to ask what that meant, wanted to understand the full scope of what he'd done to protect her, but he was already moving toward the door. Come with me. They walked through the silent hallways, past the kitchen where Maria's betrayal had played out, past the study where everything had changed. Lorenzo's hand stayed on the small of her back, a constant presence guiding her forward. When they reached the foyer, she understood where he was taking her. The front door, the massive wooden door with the brass handle, the same door she'd been reaching for when this nightmare began. Lorenzo moved ahead of her and placed his palm on the biometric lock. The bolts disengaged with heavy clicks. He gripped the handle and pulled, swinging the door wide open. Sunlight flooded the foyer, warm and bright and promising. Beyond the door, she could see the circular driveway. A black car waited there, engine running, ready to take her anywhere she wanted to go. Lorenzo stepped aside, giving her a clear path. The past is dead, he said, his voice carefully controlled. The threats are gone. You are free to go, Sienna. No debt, no obligation, no chains. She stared at the open door, at the world beyond it. Freedom. The thing she'd been chasing her whole life. The thing her brother had died trying to give her. It was right there, 3 steps away, offered without condition or manipulation. Lorenzo wasn't blocking her path this time, wasn't slamming his hand against the frame or growling threats about not surviving the night. He was opening the cage and telling her to fly, just like Toby had asked him to. Sienna looked at the car, looked at the ring on her finger where she'd slipped it this morning, looked back at Lorenzo standing beside the open door, his expression carefully blank but his eyes betraying everything he was trying to hide. The fear, the grief, the love that was willing to break itself one more time if that's what she needed. She saw the geometric tattoos crawling up his neck, the evidence of a life lived in shadows and violence. She saw the bandages beneath his shirt, the price he'd paid in blood to keep her breathing. She saw the man who'd carried her brother's dying wish for 2 years, who'd built an entire false reality just so she could have dignity, who'd loved her quietly from a distance because he thought that's what she deserved. Sienna walked toward the door. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, his hands flexing at his sides, but he didn't move, didn't try to stop her. She reached out and wrapped her fingers around the brass handle. For a moment, she just stood there, feeling the weight of the choice. Then she pulled. Hard. The door swung shut with a definitive thud that echoed through the foyer. She twisted the manual deadbolt, locking it from the inside. The sound of metal sliding home felt like a vow. She turned to face Lorenzo. His expression had cracked open, everything he'd been holding back flooding his features. Hope, disbelief, relief so profound it looked like pain. Sienna closed the distance between them and placed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her fingers. "I'm exactly where I belong," she said, her voice steady and sure. Lorenzo's hand covered hers, pressing it harder against his heart. "Are you sure? Because once you make this choice, Sienna, there's no going back. My world is dangerous. It's dark. You'll never be completely safe." She smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd given him. "I don't want safe, Lorenzo. I want real. I want you." His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Then you have me, all of me, for as long as you want me. Forever then," she whispered. And when he kissed her this time, it wasn't desperate or grief-fueled or driven by adrenaline. It was a promise, a beginning, the first moment of the rest of their lives, chosen freely, with full knowledge of the cost. Behind them, the locked door stood as a symbol. She wasn't his prisoner. She was his partner. And she'd chosen the darkness, the danger, the beautiful, terrible man who loved her enough to let her go. She'd chosen him, and that made all the difference. If Sienna's choice sent shivers down your spine, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Join us for the next story, where the stakes are even higher and the secrets run deeper. You won't want to miss what happens when love and loyalty collide in the shadows.